Good morning, dolls, and welcome to Little Gretchen's workshop. So today I'm going to finish dressing the lady dolls who are guests at the wedding. Now, I do have several videos out there for when I make ladies' clothing, so I'm not going to go through all the different parts of this doll's outfit, mainly the skirt and the sleeves, because I've done that before, but I'm doing a slightly different treatment for her blouse, so I did want to show you dolls this part. Now, I actually used a piece of lace that I actually stitched to the front of her, and I want to show you how I make my ruffles. So I had a really thin, small piece of lace, and I actually threaded it on a needle and gathered it really tightly, and it's going to create an effect that's going to look like ruffles down the front of her shirt. Now here I am using my needle to thread through a really small piece of lace, but I'm threading it along the edge. And the more I went through, the more layers that bunched up, the more ruffly it looked. And after I gathered the whole thing, I cut it in several sections. Now the two longest pieces I reserved to go down the front of the blouse in the area where the placket normally would be, because I want this blouse to look very ornate and fancy, because I want these dolls to look very sophisticated. Now these dolls are the ones I call my rare porcelain doll collection, so I want their outfits to be very special. On this frame, I'm actually attaching the ruffle with my needle. I could have glued it, but I really want it to be secure and very, very neat, because not only is it a decorative piece, but it's going to serve as a closure as well. Now, after I had the first one attached, I thought it looked really cute, and I went ahead to add the second one right next to it to fill in that open space in the front of her blouse. So dolls, this is a very simple technique, but it really helps to make your women dolls blouses and pieces look very, very complex and more intricate than they really are. Now, dolls, I've always mentioned that I really was not one that was interested in sewing, but to get certain effects, it is necessary every now and then to pull out your needle and thread, because the result is really worth it. Now, this technique will work with any type of lace, but when you're working with 12 scale dolls, you really want to pay attention to the pattern or the size of the lace or print, because if things are too large, they'll look very unnatural. Now, after I was happy with the ruffles down the front of her blouse, I went on to add the exact same treatment around her wrists, because I really wanted her outfit to look really fancy. So rather than doubling up the little ruffle, I just wrapped it around in a single layer. And this time, instead of sewing it, I actually did glue it around her wrist. And you can see here the lace is just simply threaded through, and I'm pulling it to make it look more curly. Now, at this point, I haven't removed it from the thread because I don't want it to unravel. Now, here you see me trimming it to a smaller length so it won't be too long, and then I added a tiny dab of glue around her wrist, and then I gently pressed the lace right into the glue. Now, you will need to hold it for a little bit until the glue catches. If you prefer to sew your ruffles, that's fine as well. Now, after I got the little ruffles around her sleeves, I went on to create a high neck for her blouse. Now, I want you to notice that each piece of her blouse, I'm adding it individually. Now, I added an ample amount of glue around her neck, and then just took the piece of lace that I wanted to be her collar, and I laid it right into the glue and wrapped it all the way around to the back, and then trimmed off the excess. Now, I did add a little dab of glue to the back to make sure the back of it stayed secure. And then I overlapped that piece to ensure that it stayed in place. And you can clearly see from this angle how lovely that looked. Now you can see how those couple little tricks really made her outfit look a lot more fancy and way more complex than it actually is, but it really makes it way more interesting to look at. So now that the front of her blouse is complete and her sleeves are done, let me go ahead and complete her outfit. So I added another little piece of the same type of lace to the bottom just below where I put the ruffle to give her blouse sort of like a peplum. After I determined how long the lace piece needed to be, I actually did gather it so that the lace would flare out more around her waist. If anybody is curious about the type of lace I'm using, it's actually the type of lace that many seamstresses use for seam binding. Now, I'm really pleased with the look of her blouse in the front, but if you notice, she doesn't have a blouse on in the back. I'm going to cover that with her jacket. Now, I had already prepared the back of the jacket, and I've already applied the glue, so I'm fitting it right up against her back, covering the tops of her sleeves, and fitting it really close on her back. Now, I am adding a little additional glue under the jacket back so I can pinch the back and make it really neat. And if you look closely, you can see how I overlapped the straps to the shoulders over her arm. And now I'm adding the front piece to the front of the jacket to cover up those top tabs on the shoulder as well, and laying the piece right under her arm and along her side of her waist. Now, anytime you do a really decorative blouse, you want to be careful not to make the jacket or blazer too broad where it would cover the front, because I want as much of the roughly laced blouse to be exposed as possible, but I still want it to look like she's clearly wearing a jacket. Now, I really do like how nice and neat the jacket fits around her waist. Now, the back panels of her jacket are kind of uneven, so I'm definitely going to have to trim that. So here I'm adding additional glue on the inside of the jacket so that it'll fit really neatly around her waist. And by putting the glue on the inside of the jacket, you definitely won't notice it. It's not going to bleed through. And it really helps with the shape of the jacket and makes it look really neat around her waist. Now from this side, the jacket is looking really nice. The ruffles on her sleeve look great. I love the ruffles on her blouse. So we just have to even up the length of the jacket. And it's really not a big deal, dolls, because there's glue in the hem and the fabric is pretty firm, so it's not going to ravel. So I just trimmed it off. And after I trimmed off the excess fabric, I added a little glue, and then I turned a really shallow hem so everything would look really neat. Now that she's looking all lovely and dressed, I'm going to let her sit aside and dry until it's time to do her hair. Now, I was really excited about working on this doll because I'm getting an opportunity to use my brown gauze that was gifted to me by one of my precious dolls. And I will leave a link in the description so you can see when I received that as part of a gift. Now the brown gauze is going to really work out well because when I create her sheer sleeves, everything will look really natural. So I started her blouse by making her a simple tube top, and I just glued the fabric in the back. And then I began to play around with a piece of lace to determine how I wanted to style the blouse. So I ended up cutting a piece of the lace that'll go on top of the little tube top to create sort of like an overlay. Definitely pay attention to the patterns in your lace to really showcase the design. Once the overlay was in place, I created some sleeves by just gathering the shoulders and around her wrist. And I also added an extra piece of lace to create a peplum. Now I really wanted it to kind of stand out and look really Victorian, so I used a navy blue trim to just create an interesting looking neckline, and I followed the trim all the way around the back. Now I made her skirt really simple in a nice cotton green color. I really love the vintage look of the cream, the green, and the navy blue. It looks very Victorian. I'm just so tickled at how pretty she looks, and I'm so pleased with how nice the blouse looks with her brown arms. Now I had another lovely guest to the wedding, and I made her dress very similar to the previous doll. I gave her a small tube top, created a skirt, and it's exactly the same technique except the fabric is all the same color. And I'm really happy that she's able to stand, and it looks like she's pretty happy too because she looks like she's in worship. And I went on to make her some sleeves using the same type of fabric. I gathered them at the shoulder and I gathered them at the wrist. Now, when you curve it at the top with the cut and you gather it, it gives like a puff sleeve type of look, which really reminds you of sort of like a mutton sleeve. Well, that's what it looks like to me, but it makes it look nice. It looks very feminine and soft. Now, after I created the gathers that made the puff, I just kind of arranged it a little bit so it looked nice and neat. Now you can see in this frame that her sleeve isn't gathered, although the shoulder is done. So I did the same thing, just gathered around her wrist. And to me, the gathers at the wrist make it look very dainty and feminine. Now you definitely can do straight sleeves, but they'll look very basic. And you can also achieve this look by adding glue under the sleeve and pinching it together. And after I got her sleeve nice and gathered, I trimmed off the excess and I found a lovely little piece of lace. Now it was a nice size lace, but I thought it looked a little bit big or broad for the size of her hand and the rest of her body. So I split the lace and I added it around the top of her neckline for modesty. And after I added that, I took it across her shoulders and around the back. Now, when I got done, I realized I liked the lace so much that I wanted to add it all along the hem of her skirt. Now I'm going to allow her to dry until it's time to do her hair as well. Now, dolls, I had another little doll that was in need of some help. This was the doll who is made or built in the sitting position. Her legs are like on her knees, but I ended up making her a really full skirt and some puff sleeves, and I did give her some little undies so that she would be comfortable. Now, both of these dolls came as a gift, and this one was broken. So I will leave a link in the description so you can see when I got them, so you'll really be able to appreciate the transformation. Now, when I first got her, I wasn't sure if she was a lady or a little girl, but I decided she looked like a little girl to me. So I made her a dress with a really full skirt, and her arms were full ceramic, so I went ahead and made her some short puffy sleeves that I thought would make it look a little bit more juvenile. And I put lace around the sleeves. Now I did add a little kind of a Peter Pan like collar with some lace, and here I am trying to do some little buttons to put down the front, but I decided against these buttons because I think some little gold buttons would stand out a little bit better. But I think she turned out nice, and I'm going to allow her to sit until it's time for me to do her hair as well. I think she'll really be happy in the rooming house among all the little girls. I had one more doll I needed to work on because he was in serious need of assistance. Now, he's a mass-produced doll, and I got him as a part of a bundle off of eBay, but his original form was really out of proportion. His arms were way too short, and I really don't like the way they do the doll's head and shoulders. It's kind of weird. So I'm going to totally rewrap his body with the new brown gauze. Now I did give the other doll brown arms, but his entire body is going to be fully rewrapped with the brown gauze. So I started the process by securing all the foam on his body. And after his basic foam was secured, I went on to build up his shoulders and neck area so he would look natural. And I was really tickled when I got done because after I wrapped his shoulders, he kind of looked a little buff, like he lifts weights. So I thought that would look kind of cute for his character. I definitely am going to extend his feet and create some boots so that his feet will be a little bit heavier and a little bit more extended to balance out the upper part of his body. That's always a problem with porcelain dolls. They make their upper bodies too heavy and the feet too small to balance them out without a stand. I have a recent video out on how to make a dress shirt, so I won't go over that now. But I will talk a little bit about his pants because I did make them differently than the last doll that I dressed in the previous video. Now these slacks, I want them to have a really nice crease in them. I actually put a cuff at the bottom, and I'm also going to put a pleat around the waistline. But here you just see me trying to fit both of the legs of the pants on. Now I did make them quite a bit looser or baggier for this doll because he's got more of a thicker, stocky build, so his pants need to be a little bit looser. And you can see a little bit in a couple of these frames that I made him his new shoes with the milliput. Now here I'm trying to arrange the pants so I can determine where I want to add the pleats to be at the waist of his pants. And after I worked with the pleats and the crease a little bit, I determined where I wanted to actually put the pleats. And after I arranged everything, I added my glue and trimmed off the excess around the top of his pants. And then I went on to begin to create his waistband using a very thin strip of fabric and lay it down on top of itself. And then I laid it around his waist to cover the trimmed or frayed part at the top of his pants. And after I secured the position of the waistband, I trimmed off the excess and I added a tiny little dab of glue to secure the tab. I thought his outfit looked really nice, and I think it's time to add a few details. Now, in a previous video, I pre-made the suspenders, buttons, bow ties, and belts. And I will leave a link in the description so you can see that video. Now in this frame, I'm adding my buttons while I allow the suspenders to dry in the front. It's always the best practice to allow the suspenders to dry in the front before you try to attach them in the back. So I'm distracting myself by adding the buttons. And here I'm just adding a little dab of glue to his cuffs to add another little button. Now that I've added his suspenders and buttons, I'm going to allow him to sit aside and allow him to dry along with the other dolls before I go on to add his additional details, including his hair. Now, if you've enjoyed this video today and want to see more content like this, go ahead and subscribe. And always look for me on Mondays and Wednesdays after 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And I'm looking forward to seeing you all on the next episode of Little Gretchen's Workshop. Bye-bye now, dolls.